My mother told me that my presence would disgrace the family. 6 hours later, one of the most powerful women in Boston crossed a crowded ballroom, wrapped me in a hug, and announced that I was her best friend from Harvard Law. But that was not the moment my sister's perfect night truly collapsed. That happened when I opened the silver folder I had carried into the gala and revealed why 3 federal investigators were waiting in the hotel lobby. Hello. My name is Sarah Chen. I was 34 years old when my family finally learned that silence is not the same as failure. For most of my childhood, my parents treated achievement like a family religion. My father, Daniel, was a financial consultant who could turn any dinner into a lecture about reputation. My mother, Evelyn, chaired charity committees and remembered the social rank of every person she had ever met. My younger sister, Melissa, learned their language early. She knew which names to mention, which clubs to join, and which photographs to post. She built a boutique interior design company called Melissa Chen Living and married Connor Walsh, a charming investment manager with expensive suits and an even more expensive smile. I took a different path. I graduated from Harvard Law, clerked for a respected federal judge, and joined Morrison, Pierce & Cole, one of Boston's wealthiest corporate law firms. By 29, I was on the partnership track. I had the corner office, the private car service, and a salary large enough to make my parents mention me at every party. Then I resigned. I became an assistant United States attorney and accepted less than half the money to prosecute public corruption, financial fraud, trafficking networks, and organized crime. My mother called it professional suicide. My father called it an emotional decision. Melissa called it proof that even the golden child could fall. They heard the smaller salary and stopped listening. They never asked about my cases. They did not know I had received a Department of Justice commendation. They did not know my work had helped recover millions of stolen public dollars. They did not know I had been promoted to senior prosecutor, or that my former judge was supporting me for a future seat on the federal bench. I stopped explaining, because every explanation became an argument. The email arrived at 2017 on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my office overlooking downtown Boston, reviewing bank records connected to a charity fraud investigation. The case involved shell companies, inflated vendor invoices, and donations that disappeared before reaching the sick children whose faces appeared in the fundraising brochures. Then my mother's name appeared on my screen. Sarah. She wrote, Melissa's hospital gala is Saturday. This is the most important night of her career. Amanda Richardson is hosting, and many potential clients will attend. Given your failed career and your uncomfortable work with criminals, you are not to come. Melissa cannot afford embarrassment. Please do one unselfish thing for your sister and stay away. I read it twice. My failed career. My uncomfortable work with criminals. Apparently, prosecuting criminals was less respectable than designing their penthouses. Before I could close the message, Melissa texted me. Mom told you, right? Promise you won't show up. I replied. I wasn't planning to crash your gala. Her response came immediately. Good. Amanda Richardson's circle could transform my business. I need people to see me as the successful Chen daughter. Please don't make this about you. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed my sister's approval, but because I had spent years protecting her from things she did not even know existed. 6 months earlier, my office had begun investigating the Harbor Light Children's Foundation, the charity receiving the gala's donations. A confidential audit suggested that hundreds of thousands of dollars had been routed through a consulting company called North Beacon Strategies. North Beacon had no real employees and no public office, but it had paid large marketing fees to Melissa's company. At first, I believed my sister might be innocent. Melissa often accepted wealthy clients without examining where their money came from. I removed myself from the investigation the moment her company name appeared and disclosed the family connection to my supervisor. Even after recusing myself, however, I could not forget one detail. Connor Walsh, my brother-in-law, had introduced Melissa to the foundation's treasurer. I was still staring at her message when my paralegal, Kevin Morales, knocked on my open door. The last bank production came in, he said. You should see this. He placed a folder on my desk. Inside was a transfer chart prepared by the investigation team. North Beacon had received money from the Children's Foundation. North Beacon had paid Melissa's design company. Within 48 hours, Melissa's company had sent part of that money to an investment account managed by Connor. The same pattern had happened 11 times. My stomach tightened. Does the team know she's my sister? I ask. Yes, your recusal is documented. No one thinks you touched the investigation after the conflict appeared. And the gala? The task force believes it may be used to bring in new donations before the accounts are frozen. I looked again at my mother's email. Melissa did not merely want me absent because she was ashamed of me. Someone might want the federal prosecutor in the family kept far away from the room. My personal phone rang. Amanda Richardson's name filled the screen. Amanda had been my roommate during our first year at Harvard Law. We had shared terrible coffee, impossible reading assignments, and enough fear to build a lifelong friendship. Years later, she had become a major advocate for children's health programs. Her husband served in Congress, but Amanda's influence came from her own intelligence, not his title. "Sarah," she said, "I just heard something strange. Melissa told the planning committee you couldn't attend because you were having professional problems." I leaned back in my chair. "Did she? She made it sound as if you had lost your law license." For a moment, I could not speak. Amanda continued more softly. "I know you can't discuss active cases. But is there something I need to know about Harbor Light?" That question told me she had already sensed trouble. "I can't answer that," I said carefully. "You should speak to the Foundation's independent counsel before Saturday." She was silent for 3 seconds. "Understood. Now answer a different question. Will you come as my personal guest?" "My mother ordered me to stay away." "Your mother is not hosting." "I am." "Despite everything?" I smiled. "Amanda, if I come, it may become complicated. Then I'll make sure you're not standing alone when it does." An hour later, my supervisor called me into his office. Deputy U.S. Attorney Martin Hale was a patient man with silver hair and the habit of removing his glasses when a conversation became serious. "The task force plans to serve preservation orders Saturday night," he said. "Not inside the Gala unless funds begin moving. You remain recused from decisions involving your sister." "Of course. But Amanda Richardson has requested you attend as her guest. There's no legal reason you can't go. You will not question anyone, collect evidence, or act on behalf of the investigation." "Then why are you telling me about the preservation orders?" "Because your name appears in a document recovered this morning." He slid a printed email across his desk. It was from Connor to the Foundation treasurer. "Sarah will be kept away." It read, "Evelyn and Melissa believe she is a failure and will handle her. Once the gala closes, move the final amount before Monday." My hands went cold. My brother-in-law had used my own family's contempt as part of his plan. My supervisor watched my face. "Go if you want to go," he said, "but go as Sarah, not as a prosecutor. Let the team do its work." I folded the email and returned it. "I understand." By Saturday afternoon, my mother had called 4 times. I did not answer. Melissa sent 2 more warnings. Connor sent none. At 7 o'clock, I stood before my mirror in a simple navy gown. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and no necklace. In my hand was a silver folder containing only documents I was legally permitted to carry: my invitation, my recusal notice, and a letter from the hospital's independent counsel. The last item had arrived 1 hour earlier. It said Melissa's company had been suspended as a gala vendor pending an internal financial review. I did not know whether my sister was a willing participant or a convenient shield for her husband. But I knew one thing. My family had spent 3 years pretending I was invisible. That night, invisibility was about to become my greatest advantage. The Boston Hotel ballroom looked like a palace built from glass and gold. Crystal lights hung above white tables. A string quartet played near the staircase. Politicians, physicians, philanthropists, judges, and business leaders moved through the room holding champagne. At the entrance, Melissa stood in an emerald gown beside Connor. My mother wore silver. My father adjusted his cufflinks while speaking to a hospital trustee. They looked like a family portrait, one carefully edited to remove me. The woman checking invitations smiled when she found my name at the top of the VIP list. "Mems Chen, Mrs. Richardson asked us to bring you directly to her." Melissa heard. Her head turned so quickly that one jeweled earring struck her neck. "Sarah." The color left my mother's face. She reached me first and lowered her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Attending a charity gala." "I explicitly told you not to come." "I'm 34, Mom. You don't issue orders to me." Melissa stepped between us. Her smile remained fixed for the guests, but anger burned in her eyes. "You promised you wouldn't crash this." "I didn't. I was invited." "By whom?" Before I could answer, someone called my name across the ballroom. Amanda Richardson walked away from a group of trustees and hurried toward me. Her face opened into the warm, unguarded smile I remembered from law school. She hugged me, not a formal social embrace, a real hug. Then she turned toward the guests around us. "Everyone meet Sarah Chen, my best friend from Harvard Law." The silence around my family was almost musical. Melissa's smile vanished. Amanda slipped her arm through mine. Sarah kept me alive during our first year. She shared her notes, forced me to sleep before exams, and once convinced a professor to let me retake a presentation after my father was hospitalized. Connor studied me differently now. Harvard Law? One donor asked. Are you still with Morrison, Pearson Cole? No, Amanda answered before I could. Sarah is a senior assistant United States attorney. She prosecutes federal corruption and organized crime. Several heads turned. A retired judge approached and shook my hand. A hospital board member thanked me for a trafficking prosecution that had protected children in 3 states. Another guest recognized my name from a public corruption trial. My mother stared at me as though I had changed faces. I had not changed. She was simply seeing me for the first time. For the next 40 minutes, Amanda introduced me to people who knew my work. Not one asked about my salary. They asked about justice, victims, and public trust. Across the room, Melissa watched each conversation with growing panic. Then the first real crack appeared. A hospital accountant walked onto the stage and whispered to the board chair. The chair's expression tightened. She left the ballroom with 2 attorneys. Connor noticed too. He checked his phone, typed quickly, and moved toward a side exit. I did not follow him. I did not need to. 2 investigators in evening clothes were already positioned outside. Melissa came toward me carrying a champagne glass she was gripping too tightly. What have you done? I arrived. Don't play games. Connor says federal agents are in the lobby. Then perhaps Connor should ask himself why federal agents make him nervous. Her eyes flicked toward my silver folder. Is this about my company? I am recused from any investigation involving you. That isn't an answer. It is the only answer I can legally give. She stepped closer. You came here to humiliate me. You told people I lost my law license. For the first time, shame crossed her face. I only said you had professional problems. You called my public service a failure because it made you feel taller. Everything was always easy for you, she whispered. The grades. Harvard, the clerkship. Mom and Dad comparing me to you every day. When you left the firm, I finally had one thing you didn't. I had success they could understand. Her confession might have moved me if my phone had not vibrated at that exact moment. A message from the hospital's counsel appeared. Emergency board review complete. Vendor suspension effective immediately. Please give Melissa the letter. Investigators have authorized disclosure. I opened the silver folder. Melissa stared at the hospital letter, then read the first paragraph. Her glass slipped from her fingers and struck the carpet. It did not break, but champagne spread across the pale fabric like a stain. Suspended. She breathed. They can't suspend me. I designed the entire gala. They can suspend payments to a vendor connected to questionable transfers. I earned that money. Did you? Her anger faltered. I saw the moment uncertainty entered. Connor handled the contracts, she said. He told me the payments included consulting fees. Did you ever perform consulting work? I introduced donors. I attended meetings. And after your company received the money, did Connor ask you to send part of it to an investment account? Her face drained. He said it was for taxes. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened. Connor entered between 2 investigators. He was not handcuffed, but his confidence was gone. One investigator carried his phone in an evidence bag. My mother saw him and rushed forward. What is happening? Connor pointed at me. Ask your daughter. She planned this because she hates Melissa. The lie came easily. That was the frightening part. Before I could respond, Amanda stepped between us. Sarah planned nothing, she said. The hospital began an independent audit before she accepted my invitation. Her conflict was disclosed. Your attempt to blame her has been noted. My father's face hardened. Connor, what audit? Connor ignored him and looked at Melissa. Don't say another word, we're leaving. He reached for her wrist. Melissa pulled away. It was a small movement, but it changed the entire night. Why did you tell the foundation treasurer that Sarah would be kept away? She asked. Connor froze. I had not told her about that email. The investigator must have. You're confused? He said. You wrote that Mom and I believed she was a failure, so we would handle her. My mother turned toward me. For once, she had no defense. Connor's polished expression began to fracture. Melissa, this is not the place. It became the place when you used my company to move stolen charity money. People nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Connor lowered his voice. Everything I did was for us. Money meant for sick children. It was temporary. 11 transfers are not temporary. His eyes shifted to the exits. The investigators moved closer. Then Amanda stepped onto the stage and asked the musicians to stop. The ballroom fell quiet. She did not mention arrests or accusations. She simply announced that the hospital had detected financial irregularities, frozen the affected funds, and placed all related vendor contracts under review. She assured the donors that no further money would be released until every dollar was protected. Then she looked directly at me. I also want to thank someone whose career has been misunderstood tonight. Sarah Chen chose public service when she could have chosen wealth. People like her protect institutions when appearances fail. Applause began at one table and moved across the ballroom. My mother stood beneath the chandeliers, listening to hundreds of people honor the daughter she had ordered to stay home. But justice was not finished with us. The lead investigator approached Connor. "Mr. Walsh, we need you to come with us." Connor's last attempt at control was aimed at Melissa. "If I go down," he said, "your signatures go with me." My sister stared at him, and I realized the question was no longer whether her perfect life would survive. The question was whether she deserved to survive it. The gala continued, but the illusion was over. Connor left through the side doors with investigators. Guests spoke in low voices. Hospital attorneys moved from table to table reassuring donors. My father disappeared into the lobby to call his lawyer. Melissa sat alone in a small reception room with the vendor's suspension letter in her lap. My mother wanted to follow her, but I stopped her. "Give her 5 minutes. She needs her family. She needed a family 3 days ago, when you helped her erase me from the gala." Mom's mouth tightened. "This is not the time to punish me. You still think this is about punishment. It is about consequences." But she glanced toward the ballroom, where important people were watching. Even then, part of her was thinking about appearances. "Did you know Connor was under investigation?" she asked. I knew there was an investigation. I removed myself when Melissa's name appeared. "You should have warned us." I almost laughed. Federal prosecutors do not leak investigations to their mothers. "But we are your family." "That did not matter when you told me I was too embarrassing to enter the room." She looked down. For the first time that night, she seemed smaller, not because others saw her differently, but because she saw herself clearly. Inside the reception room, Melissa finally asked to speak with me. I entered alone. Her makeup was streaked, and the proud co-chair badge had been removed from her dress. "Am I going to prison?" she asked. I sat across from her. "I cannot advise you. You need an independent criminal attorney. You're my sister. And I am a federal prosecutor who is formally recused from your case. Those facts make me the worst possible person to advise you." She pressed both palms against her eyes. "I signed documents. Do not tell me details. Connor said they were vendor agreements." "Melissa, stop. I need you to believe me." I waited. All my life, my sister had demanded belief without offering trust. Now the roles had reversed. "Belief will not be enough," I said. "You need records, emails, messages, contracts. You need the truth, including the parts that make you look selfish or careless." She lowered her hands. "What if the truth destroys my company? Then your company may need to be destroyed." Her face twisted as if I had struck her. "You enjoy this?" "No. That is the difference between us. You enjoyed telling people I had failed. I take no pleasure in seeing you frightened." She looked away. "I was jealous of you. I know. Mom and Dad compared us every day. When you got into Harvard, Dad gave a speech at dinner. When I graduated from design school, Mom asked whether I planned to get a real degree. I felt invisible. So when I chose public service, you helped them turn me into the failure." "Wes." The honesty surprised me. She continued, her voice trembling. "Connor understood that. He said I deserved to be the successful one. He introduced me to clients. He made me feel important. Every time I questioned a payment, he said I was finally playing at your level and shouldn't ruin it by being timid." There it was. He had not only moved money through her company. He had moved it through the oldest wound in our family. "You still signed?" I said. "I know. You still accepted money you did not earn." "I know. And you helped keep me away because Connor told you my presence was dangerous." She nodded. That was when my remaining sympathy found its limit. "Hire a lawyer," I said. "Tell the complete truth. Return every dollar that does not belong to you. Cooperate if your attorney advises it. But do not call yourself innocent merely because Connor was worse." As I stood, she said, "Will you help me rebuild?" I looked back at her. "First, help repair what you broke." The next 2 months brought the kind of chaos that never fits into a single dramatic scene. The government charged Connor and 2 Foundation officers with wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and theft from a charitable program. Investigators traced more than $4 million through shell companies and false vendor contracts. Melissa hired an experienced attorney and surrendered her laptop, phone, and accounting records. The evidence showed that she had not designed the scheme, but she had ignored obvious warnings and signed false descriptions of work her company never performed. She agreed to cooperate. She returned every questionable payment, sold her Beacon Hill townhouse, and closed Melissa Chen Living. In exchange for truthful testimony and restitution, prosecutors allowed her to plead to a lesser financial offense. She received probation, community service, and a permanent stain on the reputation she had valued more than anything. Connor did not cooperate. He told his lawyers Melissa had created the invoices. He claimed my office had targeted him because I hated my sister. He leaked stories suggesting I had manipulated the case. That attack failed for one simple reason. I had recused myself before investigators knew Connor's role. Every email, meeting note, and access log proved it. The more he accused me, the more attention reporters gave the records that cleared me. My silence became evidence of my integrity. My mother hated the headlines. At first she begged me to use my connections to make the case disappear. When I refused, she accused me of choosing my career over Melissa. I reminded her that she had once accused me of choosing criminals over family. Now, I said, you are asking me to protect someone accused of stealing from sick children. Which choice would make you proud? Wish she had no answer. My father reacted differently. He began reading about my cases, not summaries from friends, but actual public filings and court opinions. One evening he called and apologized without defending himself. I measured you by income, he said. I taught Melissa to do the same. Connor used the values I gave this family. It did not erase the damage, but it was the first honest thing he had said. 3 weeks before Connor's trial, Melissa came to my condo carrying a cardboard box. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, and newspaper clippings my mother had kept from my years at the corporate firm. Nothing from my time in public service. I found these in Mom's house, Melissa said. She kept the version of you she approved of. At the bottom was the email ordering me away from the Gala, printed on paper. Across it, my mother had written a single sentence by hand. This was the moment I lost the right to call myself a fair mother. I folded the page. Is she asking me to forgive her? No. She says she's finally learning that apologies are not invoices. You cannot send one and declare the debt paid. That sounded unlike my mother. Perhaps humiliation had taught her what love could not. Connor's trial lasted 4 weeks. I never entered the courtroom. I did not want my presence used as theater by either side. Melissa testified for 2 days. She admitted her envy, her lies about my career, the money she accepted, and the signatures she failed to question. Connor's attorney tried to portray her as the mastermind. The jury did not believe him. They also saw his email about keeping me away. Evelyn and Melissa believe she is a failure and will handle her. One cruel family judgment had become a line in a federal exhibit. Connor was convicted on every major count. The judge scheduled sentencing for December. By then, another decision was waiting for me. Judge Patricia Moreno, the woman I had clerked for after Harvard, called me to her chambers. There will be a vacancy on the district court, she said. Your name is being considered. I thought of my mother's email, my sister's frozen smile, Amanda's hug, the ballroom applause. Then Judge Moreno gave me a warning. If you accept the nomination, Connor's supporters will claim your family scandal makes you unfit. Does it? She studied me. Only if you hid from it. I had spent years letting my family make me smaller because defending myself exhausted me. I was finished hiding. Then I accept, I said. My judicial nomination became public on a cold Monday morning. By noon, reporters had connected me to the Harbor Light case. Connor's allies repeated their accusation that I had engineered his prosecution. The Department of Justice released my recusal records, and legal ethics experts confirmed that I had followed every required rule. Then Amanda gave one interview. Sarah did not exploit her position, she said. She protected the investigation even when doing so meant she could not protect her own sister from consequences. That is exactly the temperament we need in a judge. The criticism faded. My confirmation hearing took place in Washington 6 months after the Gala. One senator asked why I had left a corporate salary worth more than twice my government pay. Because the value of work is not always printed on the paycheck, I answered. I wanted to serve the law where power is most tempted to believe it has no limits. Another senator asked about Connor. Did you want revenge against your brother-in-law? I wanted distance from the case, I said. Revenge depends on personal power. Justice depends on rules that apply even when the people involved are connected to us. My duty was to step aside and allow those rules to work. That answer appeared in newspapers the next morning. My mother mailed me the front page. She wrote, "I finally understand the difference." I was confirmed at 35. At my investiture ceremony, Judge Moreno administered the oath. Prosecutors, defense lawyers, former colleagues, and community advocates filled the courtroom. Amanda sat in the first row. My father sat behind her. Melissa came alone, wearing a simple gray dress. She had begun working for a nonprofit that helped small charities build transparent accounting systems. It was not glamorous. The salary was modest. For the first time in her life, neither fact embarrassed her. My mother waited outside the courtroom. She had asked whether she was welcome. I told her the ceremony was public, but that sitting in the family row was a privilege, not a performance. She chose not to claim a place she had not yet earned. After the oath, she approached me in the hallway. "Your Honor," she said. Her eyes were wet, but she did not reach for me. "Sarah, I spent years telling myself I wanted the best for you. What I really wanted was the version of your success that made me look important. When you chose something I could not brag about, I punished you." "Yes," I said. She flinched, perhaps expecting comfort. I did not soften the truth for her. "I asked you to stay away from the gala, because I thought Melissa's connections mattered more than your dignity," she continued. "Then Amanda crossed that ballroom, and every person I wanted to impress saw your worth before I did. The embarrassing part was never my career, Mom. I know. It was what I did to you." That was the closest we came to forgiveness that day. Real forgiveness is not a single speech. It is a long record of changed behavior. My mother began building that record. She stopped introducing her daughters by titles. She volunteered at a legal aid fundraiser without placing her name on the host committee. She attended one of Melissa's nonprofit workshops and sat in the back. My father kept calling every Sunday. Melissa and I rebuilt slowly. We did not pretend the jealousy had never existed. We spoke about it. Some conversations ended in tears. Others ended in silence. But she stopped asking me to make myself smaller so she could feel tall. Connor was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. At sentencing, the judge spoke about the children whose photographs had been used to collect money they never received. That was the justice that mattered. Not my mother's embarrassment. Not my sister's ruined gala. Not even Connor's fear. The stolen funds were recovered, the hospital changed its controls, and the foundation was rebuilt under independent leadership. 1 year later, the gala raised more money than ever before. Amanda invited me again. This time I arrived without a silver folder. Melissa was already there, not as co-chair and not as a designer seeking clients. She was helping the compliance team explain to donors how every contribution would be tracked. When she saw me, she smiled nervously. "You came. I was invited." She laughed at the memory, though tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry I tried to keep you out. I know. Do you think we'll ever be normal sisters?" I looked around the ballroom. The same chandeliers shone above us, but everything underneath them felt different. "I don't want normal," I said. "I want honest." She nodded. Amanda found us a few minutes later and pulled us both into a photograph. Before the camera flashed, she whispered, "No family drama tonight, please. I'm wearing new shoes." Melissa laughed. So did I later. Amanda took the stage. She spoke about transparency, courage, and the families the hospital served. Then she introduced me, but this time I asked her to keep it simple. "My best friend from Harvard Law," she said. The room applauded. I looked at my sister. Her smile remained. It was not forced. It did not vanish when the attention turned toward me. That was how I knew something real had changed. For years, my family believed success was a spotlight with room for only one daughter. They fought to decide who would stand inside it and who would disappear into the dark. They were wrong. Success is not being the most admired person in a ballroom. It is knowing who you are after the music stops, the guests go home, and no one important is watching. My mother once ordered me to stay away because she thought I would embarrass the family. I entered anyway, not to destroy them, but because I had finally understood that no one who truly loves you should require your absence to protect their pride. And if someone must make you invisible in order to feel powerful, do not beg for a place in their picture. Walk into the room carrying the truth. Then let the truth decide who should be ashamed.